If there's one thing both GOT fans and even non-fans of the show love, it's that iconic opening credit sequence. Even after that mess of a final season, the intro remained to be a sight for sore eyes. It actually took fans a while to realize that the opening sequence wasn't just pretty, but it told a story of its own too. And HOTD is no different. Stick with us as we dive into its changing opening sequence. Starting off with the first version of the credits. First things first, or should we say last things first. The very first episode of House of the Dragon had every Game of Thrones fan in tears, even those who said they would never watch anything GOT related ever again, when it ended with that unforgettable theme by Ramin Djawadi. The opening sequence to GOT ended with a closer look at one of the many mirrored globes of the Citadel's library. And just like its parent show, the final moments of House of the Dragon sequence also feature something from the universe of its series, King Viserys' detailed model of Old Valyria. Just as the opening sequence reaches its final seconds, the camera quickly cuts to display a structure exactly the same as the one we see the king often play around with in his royal chambers. By the way, Old Valyria is the place all the members of House Targaryen originated from, as well as House Velaryon, and it was located somewhere in Essos before the fateful events of the Doom of Valyria happened. Thus, after the opening credits give us a look at all the imposing buildings of Old Valyria, the camera focuses on the Targaryen crest, which is famously represented by a fire-breathing three-headed dragon. Next up, Aegon the Conqueror's cog. In the very first shot of the opening, we see a cog with very detailed imagery on it, dragons flying around the Red Keep. Specifically, it represents Aegon I's conquest of Westeros, from whom the whole Targaryen dynasty initiated, after which resulted in the Dance of the Dragons and eventually much later, the conquest of Daenerys Targaryen. Right after being activated, Aegon the Conqueror's cog is quickly flooded with blood, representing the end of his reign. As we'll quickly realize with the rest of the cogs in the sequence, whenever one fills up with blood, it means that the person it's representing has died. But if we can still see the sigil above the blood, it means that the character is still alive. Anyway, after flooding the cog, Aegon's blood starts its journey throughout the model, reaching and covering other sigils in a representation of the Targaryen bloodline before ending with Rhaenyra. Interestingly, the fact that the blood runs through the streets of the model of the ancient home of the Targaryens serves as a metaphor that the blood of Old Valyria flows through their veins. Coming up, Aegon's bloodline all the way to Jaehaerys. The blood that floods Aegon I's cog spills over to run through the sigils of his two wives, his sisters Visenya and Rhaenys, both of which get flooded too. We then focus on Rhaenys' bloodline as it makes its way to a sigil that represents her son, King Aerys. His bloodline also splits into two paths. One continues its path ahead, while the other flows behind a wall. As we follow King Aerys' bloodline, we can briefly see a dried-up sigil that probably represents the reign of Maegor the Cruel, hardly visible behind Janie Tamime's name, the costume designer. Aerys' half-brother ascended to the throne after his death, but he was eventually brought down because he had been a tyrant. Maegor was then succeeded by Jaehaerys, Aerys' last living son and the king we saw in the very first scene of House of the Dragon. So of course, the bloodline reaches his sigil. It also reaches his sister wife, Queen Alysanne, after which the bloodline splits into 9 thinner streams representing their 9 children. At first, we follow 2 of their children's bloodlines, Aemon's and Balon's, both of whom died way before their father. Aemon was actually Princess Rhaenys' father, the one who was most deserving to succeed after Jaehaerys, but ultimately lost the vote to her younger cousin, Viserys, who was Balon's son. Following up, Balon's blood. Since Viserys is the one who ascended to the throne, it's Balon's bloodline that we end up following to the end, which also fills the cog representing his wife and sister, Alyssa. His bloodline also splits into 2, one for Viserys and the other for Daemon. Interestingly, in the back, we can also see a whole other bloodstream running through a sigil placed against a blue backdrop, and right next to it, we can see a blue cog clearly representing House Velaryon, who played a huge part in the Dance of the Dragons. Anyway, back to Balon's bloodline. It runs into Viserys' cog, represented by a simple crown, but doesn't fill up with blood just yet, as he was still alive at the beginning of the show. This is a first, and it's also the first time we see a new bloodstream emerge and mix with the Targaryen family tree, Aemma Arryn's blood. Unlike her husband's, her sigil quickly gets flooded with blood. Next up, the Hightowers and Rhaenyra. The camera pans away from the main bloodline for a moment to show us 2 other cogs that have played a huge part in the Dance of the Dragons 2. Otto Hightower, whose cog sits at the top of, well, a high tower, and his blood flows in an L shape to his daughter, Alicent, whose cog is a bit lower on the model. As for the Targaryen blood, it flows for a long time before reaching a sigil represented by a symbol that we often see hanging from the necklace of young Rhaenyra. That's where the bloodline finally stops, and we move on to an overview of Old Valyria and that dragon crest. Moving on, let's look at the major changes throughout the season to the credits. The first major change to the opening happens in episode 3, where the bloodline of House Hightower grows longer, flowing through Alicent and mixing with another stream. Clearly, this shows Queen Alicent having her first son, Aegon, with King Viserys. Then, in We Light the Way, that new stream splits into two, symbolizing the birth of Princess Helena. In episode 6, we get to take a detour from Viserys' bloodline with Daemon's, from which two blood streams emerge representing his two daughters, Baela and Rhaena. The girls' respective streams are also fed with the blood coming out of another cog, Lady Laena's, whose cog remains dry in episode 6, but come episode 7, it gets drowned in blood. Rhaenyra's bloodline extends too, but instead of explicitly missing with Laena's or even Sir Harwin's, we see it go through a large box, obviously representing the doubt of Jace and Luke's parentage. Finally, in episode 9, we watch King Viserys' cog fill up with blood, representing his death, before following Alicent's stream to her 3 children. Or is it 4? In a blink and you'll miss it moment, we can see a very small cog right below Alicent's, indicating that the show has definitely not forgotten about her 4th child, Daeron Targaryen. We can also see Helena and Aegon's bloodstreams intersect and divide into 3 streams, representing their children, Jaehaerys, Jaehaera, and Maelor. Next up, the Rise of the Dragon artwork shows a breathtaking look at the Targaryen dynasty. George R.R. Martin recently announced a new book. While it's unfortunately not the book fans have been waiting literally years for, it has a unique lure of its own. Specifically, it's going to bring fans a new look into the Targaryen dynasty, one that they had never seen before. According to the description of the book, The Rise of the Dragon will chronicle the creation and rise of Targaryen power in Westeros, and will be covering all the history behind the house, all the way from Aegon Targaryen's conquest of Westeros to the Dance of the Dragons, the bloody civil war that nearly undid Targaryen rule for good, and which we're already watching unfold on House of the Dragon. What's more, the imagery is absolutely stunning. While the book hasn't been released yet, the few images that have been shared so far of the book's depiction of the rise of the Targaryen rule are absolutely breathtaking. From Aegon riding on dragons over Westeros with his sister wife, to dark yet absolutely magnificent depictions of the Iron Throne, to dragons breathing fire over the Red Keep, as well as those larger than life wreaking havoc over the kingdom. The book shows a beautiful depiction of how House Targaryen began its rule, according to an insider at Collider, who got a sneak peek at the book already ahead of its publication. The Rise of the Dragon's stunning illustrations alone make it a must-have collectible for Game of Thrones mega fans who want to know more about the rich Targaryen lore shown in House of the Dragon. Finally, when will the book be released? The Rise of the Dragon, an illustration history of the Targaryen dynasty, is a work not only by George R.R. Martin, but also by Elio M. Garcia Jr. and Linda Atkinson. Will be released on the 25th of October 2022. It'll serve as a way for fans to continue diving into the rich history of House Targaryen after Season 1 comes to an end. It's also going to be a way for fans to unpack everything they learned in Season 1 and prepare for the next season of the show whenever it eventually comes out. And that's a wrap for this video. Will you be reading the book when it comes out? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.